Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. Coming up on the show, as Israel lands a new wave of strikes across Lebanon, I speak to Lebanon's health minister about the strain the attacks are having on the country's health system. Israel saying it intercepted a heavy missile fired by Hezbollah towards a civilian area of Tel Aviv. Hezbollah saying it was targeting Mossad. Several world leaders condemn Israeli aggression in their UN General Assembly addresses, as foreign ministers warn that it is pushing the region towards all-out war. And Israel continues its war on Gaza with at least 53 people killed in strikes on homes and shelters in the past 36 hours. Well, Israel has escalated its bombardment of Lebanon, with fresh strikes launched in both the north and south amid rising regional tensions. These military actions have raised alarms about the effects on civilians and overall stability. In a notable development, Hezbollah claiming to have targeted a Mossad headquarters in the suburbs of Tel Aviv in Israel with a ballistic missile on Wednesday morning, marking its first use of such a weapon since the latest cross-border hostilities began on October 8th. Meanwhile, the Israeli military reporting fighter jets intercepted an unmanned aerial vehicle south of the Sea of Galilee after sirens were activated in the occupied Golan Heights. The UAV, which reportedly originated from Syria, entered Israeli airspace, but no damage or casualties have been reported. Well, for more on the situation in Lebanon, I'm joined by Lebanon's Health Minister, Dr. Firass Abiad. Sir, thank you for making time on a very busy day. In fact, I believe you were at the international airport there in Beirut this morning, receiving some aid. Talk to us about that, for starters.
So good afternoon. Indeed, I was in the morning at the Beirut International Airport, and I was receiving aid from Turkey. This is not the first shipment of aid that is sent to Lebanon. We've also received aid from Iraq, from Jordan, from Cairo. And I think that this is a show of solidarity that some of our friends and neighbors are sending to Lebanon to support us through these difficult times.
Would you invite more aid from international parties?
We have been talking with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think that there has been a lot of inquiries to Lebanon on how they could support the health system particularly. And indeed, we have sent our needs, and we are expecting to see more of these shipments with time.
Let's talk about the health system and how it's coping, given your brief. On Monday, and I don't need to tell you this, you were there and dealing with it, but for our viewers, Lebanon recorded more casualties than in any other single day since the 15-year civil war that started in 1975. A huge amount of casualties in one day. How did the health system cope?
Well, it was quite a difficult day for us, especially that, in last week we had also to deal with different incidents where we were, Israel attacked Lebanon through detonating communication devices or with direct hits on some of the residential areas in Lebanon as well. But in particular, what made it more difficult is the fact that almost all of the people that were, targeted on Monday were civilians. We've reported that more than 140 women and children were killed. We've lost also 9 healthcare workers, including ambulance staff. We've 2 of the workers in the UN agency, UNHCR. One of them, she died. She was killed with her 4-year-old or 3-year-old son. So it was a pretty difficult day for us, yes.
In terms of the attacks last week, you mentioned the coordinated explosions across communications devices like pagers and walkie-talkies. We actually interviewed an ophthalmologist from a hospital there in Beirut. He was talking to us about the types of injuries they were dealing with. He said he felt fairly well prepared, well supported by the government at the time, and that they are prepared for future casualties if the conflict was to widen. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like the health system can cope if there is to be more conflict?
Well, first, let's hope that there won't be any more conflict. And I'm happy that our Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs are in New York at the moment, pushing the Lebanese position, which is very clear. We do not want war. And we are calling for a ceasefire from Gaza to Lebanon and for a diplomatic solution. However, should the indiscriminate attacks against, especially against civilians, and continue, and we continue to see this large number of casualties, I am worried that our system, which already has passed through a lot of difficult times, with the financial crisis, with COVID, with the Beirut explosion, with other stresses as well, might not be able to deliver to the population the care that they need.
In terms of the population and how they're dealing with this, you're talking there about a nation that has been through so much, not only over decades, but certainly in recent years. You're seeing them on a daily basis. People are injured, people who are having family members killed. How are the Lebanese population coping right now?
Well, it is extremely difficult times for them. Also the fact that, with these indiscriminate attacks, a lot of innocent people have lost their lives. This kind of senseless killing, I think, makes it even more difficult for people to understand what's going on. I think that, the attacks on Monday, their nature was very clear. Their aim is to create a sense of terror, to terrorize the population and to force them to have a mass exodus. And unfortunately, this is what we have been seeing. We've seen tens of thousands of people fleeing their homes, their villages, their towns, and moving to what they think are safer areas. And I think that, at the moment, we have at the health sector, we have to deal with these two fronts. On one side, the casualties, and on the other side, the internally displaced and their health needs.
And mental health needs as well. We've been speaking to clinical psychologists based in Beirut over the last couple of days about the mental stress that's being put on the population. In terms of you and how you're dealing in the job, I mean, this must be, in your career, one of the biggest challenges you faced.
I fully agree. I think that, looking at a lot of those patients, the physical scars are easy to notice, but the mental scars are more difficult, but they tend to have a bigger effect. Whether we're talking about the actual patients or even the physicians and the healthcare workforce that's taking care of them. This is something that we've seen, for example, during COVID, and with and we are seeing now, especially with these types of injuries that we as physicians know that are going to be life-changing, injuries. And I think that, at the moment, everybody is very busy saving lives. But as we get, time to sort of reflect on what happened, I'm sure that, our mental conditions, things will take time to sink in.
In terms of the rest of the government that, you're supposedly a part of and having to deal with at the moment, elsewhere in the show we're going to be exploring what's happened to Lebanese politics and, obviously the role that Hezbollah plays in the country. But plenty of Lebanese, both in the country and elsewhere, saying that they just feel like the government is in disarray, that there isn't the type of structure needed to deal with a moment of conflict. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that, considering all the crises that Lebanon is passing through at the moment, I think that a lot of the areas the government have shown, good composure. And the health sector has been one of those sectors where we were able, really, despite, the difficulties that we had, to mount a very good response. Last week, we were able to absorb almost 3,000 casualties in a matter of hours. And if you compare, for example, the number of casualties in 2006 war with what we have now, we've reached in 1 week almost half the casualties that we saw in 2006. So I think that the Lebanese government is working in very difficult conditions. However, even on the diplomatic front, I think, what the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs are doing in New York are pushing very hard our agenda and our viewpoint, which is, we don't want war, and hoping that we can achieve a ceasefire that then will take away the excuse from Hezbollah to continue with what's it doing. And hopefully it will allow us to get closer to a diplomatic solution.
I'm glad you mentioned the UN and New York, the UN General Assembly currently ongoing there. Secretary General Antonio Guterres telling world leaders there that he believes Lebanon is on the brink of becoming a second Gaza. What does it feel like to hear that?
Well, I think that there are aspects that we saw in Gaza are already in Lebanon. So we've, the indiscriminate attack on civilians, the targeting of healthcare workforce, healthcare infrastructure. There is definitely a carnage ongoing in Lebanon. Now, it hasn't reached the level of, the carnage that we saw in Gaza. But in my opinion, that should there be further escalation, then this could quickly escalate into not only a bigger conflict between Lebanon and Israel, but it might even drag in other parties as well, whether states or non-state actors, and might inflame the whole Middle East. So I think that worry that Mr. Guterres expressed, I share, but I don't think it will be necessarily only in Lebanon. My worry is that we go into even a bigger conflict, and I don't think that it's in the interest of any country, for the whole region to go there.
And that's echoes the words, in fact, of US President Joe Biden in his last address to the UN General Assembly in recent days, saying it is in no one's interest to escalate this further. Some could say he was making a very targeted point towards Israel, who some are saying are escalating in their sense to de-escalate. Do you think the Israeli, I understand that you're speaking as the health minister, but do you think from your point of view, you're seeing Israel seeing that it is in their interest to escalate right now?
I don't know what does it mean to say escalate to de-escalate. I mean, this is kind of a double speak that I don't understand very well. What I understand is that there are a lot of civilians who look at their kin and they found that they have been killed. They look at their family members and they find that they have been maimed or have suffered really life-changing conditions. And a lot of the feeling that that I feel when I do rounds on hospitals and talk to those families is a feeling of defiance and a feeling of anger. So I don't think that the escalation is the right step towards de-escalation or towards finding a diplomatic solution to this conflict. I think the right way to approach this is what the UK Prime Minister said yesterday in the Labour conference, is to start with a ceasefire in Gaza, hopefully also with the release of the hostages. This will take away the excuse that some of the non-state actors are using to escalate. And hopefully that will allow us to move forward towards a diplomatic solution. Now, does the Israeli government agree with that kind of path? The events of the last week do not appear or do not show that this is what is on their mind.
In terms of the way that Israel is conducting its attacks, we saw obviously the explosions of pagers and walkie-talkies last week. They haven't officially taken responsibility for that yet, but many people saying Mossad were behind it. But in terms of the aerial bombardment as well of what's happening over Lebanon at the moment, what type of injuries does that result in? How aggressive are the tactics from a health point of view when you're seeing the injuries come in?
Well, they are pretty aggressive because, definitely there has been much development in weaponry. And we are seeing now that there are weapons that are being used that have a devastating effect. on people. Now, what adds to that is the succession, which means that a lot of the hospitals are working almost at full capacity, and it means that sometimes patients, when they are brought to the hospitals, you might not be able to provide them with the necessary care early on, and that in itself might lead to worse outcomes. So I think that, also what is worsening the situation is the targeting of ambulances and healthcare workforce. Today, we had two attacks which were extremely near to two of the largest public hospitals in the south, one in Nabatieh and one in Tibnin. And that also, as you know, when you target these hospitals, it also impedes access of the injured to proper healthcare. So I think that whether it is the weapons used, whether it's the methodology, whether it's the indiscriminate nature, whether it's the targeting of ambulances and healthcare workers, all of this, at the end of the day, they lead to the outcome that probably was intended, and that is to cause the maximum injury and harm possible.
Well, another outcome of it is, could they be charged with violating international law?
Well, I think that if you listen to the UN Human Rights Chief, Mr. Turk, the other day when Lebanon presented its case in front of the Security Council, he was very clear in saying that this is a clearly indiscriminate attack, which is a violation of the international humanitarian law. Also, when you look at the targeting of for example, healthcare professionals or healthcare vehicles. I mean, we've reported on Monday the attack on 19 ambulances and firefighting engines. Now, Israel cannot claim that it doesn't have good intelligence on what's happening in Lebanon. They seem to have excellent intelligence on what's happening. And therefore, this targeting of these healthcare facilities or vehicles or personnel seems to be premeditated, and that is also in violation of IHL or of the Geneva Convention. So I think that there is a very good case to say that these are indeed war crimes. But, for a state that has been indicted in front of the, International Court of Justice, but however, feel it has impunity to continue with its assaults on civilians, whether calling this a war crime or not, whether will it change any of their behavior, I will leave it up to the listeners to decide.
And the official line we've been getting out of Israel over the last year regards to Gaza and the types of attacks they're conducting there is that they're targeting Hamas terrorists in Gaza, and that it is necessary, therefore, to hit targets that include hospitals, that have included schools, that have included refugee camps in order to attack those terrorists. And yes, of course, there are civilian casualties as well. Do you have that same fear when it comes to Lebanon, that hospitals could also be on that list if there was considered to be, for example, a Hezbollah command station inside?
This has been a repeated excuse that the Israelis have used to try to justify their actions, which, as I said, is baseless. And I think that none of what they mentioned in Gaza, was proven. On the contrary, the opposite was proven correct. And here in Lebanon, some of what they're saying, for example, people hiding cruise missiles in their homes. I mean, that is an insult to our intelligence, to be honest, to think that people can hide, these weapons in their homes. Or, for example, when they've hit today one of the most, a Christian area, which is politically diametrically opposite to Hezbollah, and say that Hezbollah is using that particular area to hide its weapons. I mean, really, I think this is, these are very, superficial and blatant lies. And I think that, the international community has a duty, really, to enforce its, international humanitarian laws, or at least to protect these laws, because without them, unfortunately, we really will go into a very, very dark future.
In terms of the issues now that you're dealing with on your agenda, which must be enormous, part of that is the displaced people, because a lot of people have moved out to southern Lebanon north to get away from attacks, and there are people moving in and around and outside of the capital, Beirut, as well. What type of challenge does that pose to you from a health perspective?
Well, it's a very big challenge because of the sheer numbers. I mean, we're talking about probably, the numbers, the true numbers are in hundreds of thousands of internally displaced population. And remember, these populations, they fled with the skin on their bodies, so to speak. But so we really have to, find ways to, address their needs. Some of them are patients with chronic conditions, with, dialysis patients or patients with cancer on treatment. Some of them were pregnant women who, needs, access to birthing centers and others. Some of them are patients who have chronic illnesses. They need chronic medications, and they don't have neither the money nor the nor their medications on them. So we really need to provide for all of this, on top of course, addressing the other logistical issues such as food, shelter, water and sanitation, and others. Remember also that this crowdedness in evacuation centers can lead to certain illnesses. Gaza suffered from polio. This was the first time polio was recorded in Palestine for an extremely long period of time. So I think that it does pose a lot of challenges, and that's why in the ministry we consider that we are fighting on two fronts: the casualty front and the internally displaced front.
In terms of making sure that you have the resources required to then deal with those two fronts on the health front, nobody wants to speak about economics in a time of conflict, of course, but some economists saying that what's happening to Lebanon right now could result in a contraction of 10 to 25% of the Lebanese economy within this year. How much does that concern you in terms of the amount of resources you'll have available for healthcare?
Well, the government has prioritized health, the health sector, and we have been allocated parts of the budget to be able to address the needs of the population. So, and our focus is on the now, and to see how we can quickly mobilize resources to make sure that whether the wounded or whether the displaced have the required care. Whether medications or medical care that is required. Now, on the medium to long term, I think that Lebanon has been suffering with different crises, and we'll see how the effect on the economy and how that can be managed.
Where do you see things heading from here? Israel saying that it's got more strikes ready regards to Hezbollah in Lebanon. What are you braced for in coming days?
Well, we have to hope for the best. And as I said, I think that, the efforts that Lebanon is doing, along with the other stakeholders, stakeholders that I think have, a lot of, that they can exert a lot of pressure on Israel. Let's hope that, all of the efforts that are ongoing now in New York will allow us to take the situation, de-escalate the situation, and take it into a better place. Now, am I optimistic? The answer is no. Unfortunately, I believe that the Israelis have made their intentions clear. It's clear that they are intent on escalating, and therefore we need to prepare for the worst. And that is what we have been doing with our hospitals and our healthcare workers and workforce and our friends. We've been trying to, increase our level of preparedness, upscale our level of preparedness for anything that might come.
On top of health preparedness, what should the government be focusing on right now to ensure that Lebanese civilians feel like they have options in case the aerial bombardment continues, in case there's more strikes on other cities and villages? You're talking about things like places to go, where they're going to get food from and shelter.
Well, as I said, I think that there are basic needs, and these are the things that the government's emergency plan addresses, such as you mentioned, food, shelter, water, sanitation, and health, obviously. And then we take it from there, and we see, how can we maintain order within the country. But at the same time, we have to keep working on the political and diplomatic front and try working with our friends to sort of make sure that the right amount of pressures are exerted on the Israelis to scale down. Because at the end of the day, it's clear that the senseless violence will not solve this crisis. And we have to, find a political solution. I mean, at the end of the day, violence will never allow us to reach to a sustainable and a lasting solution.
Just finally, asking you a question about the reporting of the numbers of the dead, because I'm not making comparisons here. I understand Gaza is a completely different situation, often referred to as the Hamas-run health ministry. And in Western reporting, there's been lots of criticism over whether or not numbers can be relied on, but it is the numbers that exist from numbers of killed civilians out of Palestine. In terms of when you report the numbers of the dead, like you had to do in vast numbers on Monday from Lebanon, are you at all concerned that this issue will become politicized in coming weeks?
Well, first, let me correct that these people are not dead. These people were killed. And I think that this is important. And if that is being considered politicizing the issue, then let it be. But it is extremely important to make sure that people understand what is happening. These people were killed by an indiscriminate attacks. Second, in contradistinction to Gaza, Lebanon has allowed the international media to come in. They are free to roam all across the country. There are no limitations. They can see for themselves what is happening. They can ask anybody. They have access to anybody. And they can freely report back to their stations or their countries. So I think that it is very easy if, there is any fabrication of numbers. It is very easy to check on the numbers of the, whether it's the ministry or any other numbers that are in the country. And I think that, our numbers, if anything, are an underestimate, because there are a lot of people that are still under the rubble, that, that these bodies have not been extracted. And we try to double and triple check our figures before we publish them. Also, there are other international organizations, such as the World Health Organizations, who are also present with us in our FAYOC, and they also have access to the same numbers. And, also they are looking at that as well. So I think that as far as, the numbers are concerned, clearly, I think the opportunity to check on those numbers is present for all.
I appreciate you answering that question for me, and it's been good to speak to you. We'll let you get on with the task at hand. Lebanon's Health Minister, Dr. Firass Abiad.
Thank you very much.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by the former Israeli ambassador to the US and former chief negotiator with Syria between 1993 and 1996, and current president of the Israel Institute, Itamar Rabinovich. Sir, thank you for making time.
My pleasure.
Thank you for speaking to us. Look, in terms of what's being called escalate to de-escalate, Israel's seeming current strategy across the border, across Lebanon, does it make sense as a strategy to you?
it makes sense. I am not sure that it will work, but it makes sense. The problem is that from day one, Nasrallah made a big mistake by tying Lebanon to Gaza and attacked Israel on October 8th and announced that the Lebanese arena is tied to the situation in Gaza. And he doesn't want to dissociate. And he kept us on a war of attrition for a whole year. And Israel, and of course, we have a large number of Israelis from the area of the Lebanese border who had to evacuate, became refugees in our own country for a year. And from our point of view, it's time to return to normalcy. So yes, the policy of the government now is to escalate, to exert more pressure, to trying to force Nasrallah by force of the sword to do what he refused to do until now.
In terms of Israel fighting on two fronts at the moment, because there have been continued strikes in Gaza over the last 24 hours as well, more casualties reported there, and at the same time, its strategy it's pursuing with Hezbollah over the border in Lebanon. You're talking there about Nasrallah getting involved in the situation in Gaza. Is that then, from your sense, Israel's trying to decouple it, to try and say that they're two different things?
It does. Actually, there's barely any fighting left in Gaza. In military terms, the war in Gaza is over. The issue is how to get to a diplomatic settlement. So, in fact, we are now fighting in one front, the Lebanese front, but we are preoccupied with other fronts. There were missiles fired at Israel from Iraq, and probably we'll hear something from the Houthis in Yemen. This is the ring of fire built by Iran around Israel. The idea is to encircle Israel with a ring of enemies. Not all of them are active, but some of them are active. But the main brunt now is with Hezbollah, which is a formidable foe.
In terms of Israel feeling encircled, of course, it has vast military capabilities. There's an Iron Dome that defends against missiles. A heavy surface-to-surface missile, Israel is saying, was intercepted from Hezbollah today, fired towards civilian areas of Tel Aviv. So do you think Israel is then justified to conduct vast air raids and aerial bombardments over Lebanon in response to those types of missile?
Well, the thing is that both sides have red lines, and Israel and Hezbollah know each other's red lines. If Hezbollah knows that if it fires heavy rockets into the center of the country, into Tel Aviv and south of Haifa, Israel may well retaliate either by attacking the Shiite parts of Beirut or attacking their heavy missiles in Lebanon, and eventually may even decide on a land operation. So he knows that, and we know that by taking such actions, we are, in a way, inviting the next phase in Hezbollah's response. So it's a well-known and a well-calculated game between the two parties.
Does all of that help Israelis feel safer if they know there's a calculated response likely coming from Hezbollah?
It's, it's difficult here. I mean, it's been a year of fighting. We have the people from the north who became refugees. We have the people from the south, the area around the Gaza Strip, which are also refugees. We still have, of course, our hostages in Gaza. The economic price is staggering. I mean, to keep a country at war for a whole year is not easy. Israel's wars in the past were based, among other things, on trying to achieve everything with a swift blow. This has not been the case this time. So the country is going through a tough period.
You mentioned the hostages because some still not returned from Gaza, and that was obviously a stated war aim of Netanyahu. Some have been killed during their time in captivity in Gaza as well. And then In the last 24 hours, we heard Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant responding, I believe this was to Antonio Guterres of the UN, talking about the nightmare in Gaza. Yoav Gallant saying the nightmare you speak of is the reality is that Hezbollah has taken Lebanon hostage. What did you make of those remarks?
Well, this is a different use of the same term, hostage. But in the Gallant remarks, hostage means that a sub-state organization like Hezbollah has taken over the Lebanese state. The Lebanese state, unfortunately, is in many respects an empty shell, and Hezbollah chooses to be the power not beyond the throne. It doesn't wish to take direct power and be responsible for everything in Lebanon, but it makes sure that it controls all major decisions. It participates in power. It's a member of the coalition. Hezbollah itself is stronger than the Lebanese army. Lebanon, the Lebanese state or political system has no influence over decisions that affect all Lebanese. And therefore, if they feel that their country was taken hostage by an organization that ultimately takes its orders from Iran, they are right.
And so let's talk about Lebanese people, because Benjamin Netanyahu actually releasing a statement this week, speaking directly to your neighbours across the border in Lebanon, saying this military action is not targeted at you, it's targeted at Hezbollah. The war is not with the Lebanese people. You're saying there you feel, it's your belief that the Lebanese country, Lebanese people have been taken hostage by Hezbollah. You know, some 500 people killed, including some, dozens of women and children by Israel's bombing campaign over Lebanon in the last few days, civilian bystanders of the targeted attacks. How do you think Israel is going to mend relations with the Lebanese people and coexist alongside them once this passes?
Well, two things here. One, part of the tactics of organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas is to embed themselves in the midst of civilian populations and institutions in an effort either to protect themselves or to make it more difficult for the other side to deal with them. That's been the case for more than 20 years now. And secondly, I'm afraid that there's not much to mend with the Lebanese population. There used to be a case before the days of Hezbollah when, on the whole, the relationship between Lebanese and Israelis indirectly was not cordial, but was fine, easier than relationship with other Arabs. Unfortunately, now there is popular enmity, and it would take years to amend it.
In terms of the way Netanyahu is conducting himself recently, talk to me about that, because he, over the last year, pretty much since October 7th, you saw his popularity as a leader decline enormously in the way that he was handling the conflict there in Gaza. And then within recent days, some internal polling within Israel showing that he's recovering some, not enough to sort of remain in power if there were to be some sort of election now. But how much is he thinking about domestic power at home at the moment?
Yes, Netanyahu is not doing well politically. He's seen by most of the public responsible for the debacle of October 7 and for the misconduct of the war that in Gaza that has taken a year and has not ended yet. People like to use the term Churchillian to describe the conduct of a war by a civilian leader who is above the military leadership. Well, Netanyahu, unfortunately, is not a Churchill.
What makes you say that? What's he lacking that Churchill had that he doesn't have?
I think the war has not been managed well for the past year. I'm afraid we may not have the time to get into the details of that, but there was no reason on October 8, when the war began, for this war to unfold for a whole year. There was no reason not to bring in a few months earlier another force that could replace Hezbollah as the governing or influential power in Gaza. If we make a deal and we leave, Hamas will remain in power in Gaza. So what's the point? But the point is that the only power that can come in with some help from the region and internationally is the Palestinian Authority. But Netanyahu and his radical right-wing partners in the cabinet do not want a Palestinian Authority. That is a major hindrance for running the war.
Yeah, a hindrance and also lack of any agreement so far on a ceasefire. There's been, the Americans have said they've put forward on the table a number of different iterations of an offer that have been declined multiple times. There's been haggling over access and passes and things like that. But do you think ultimately any type of ceasefire agreement is within reach at the moment?
No, I know that some contacts continue, but I'm not sure that they went very far. And at any point, the attention now, or the political capital, everything is focused on the Lebanese front. And I'm afraid, sorry for the families of the hostages, that their issue is going to be sidelined for some time now.
Returning to the...
Also remember that...
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, that there are elections in America soon. President Biden is about to vanish from the scene. This is not a good time for the United States to be a peacemaker in the region.
Yes, and we're talking about that elsewhere in the show, in fact. The role, the responsibility that the US potentially has and the timing of all of this, as you say, with the election. Look, I just want to return the focus back to the Lebanese front, given the current situation, what's happening in Lebanon the last few days. In terms of the displaced residents you mentioned there, this was the stated new war goal of Netanyahu and his cabinet to begin the aerial bombardment over Lebanon because they want to return these 60,000 displaced Israelis in the north of Israel back. Do you think what's currently happening in Lebanon will help them achieve those aims?
Well, as I said, this is government policy. Government policy is that since nothing else worked, trying to pressure Hezbollah, inflicted some heavy blows on Hezbollah with the beepers and other, and a targeted killing of most of the military leadership of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is in some disarray. They feel that Hezbollah is weakened, and they think our leadership, that they can possibly bring them to separate from Gaza and come to a political settlement that would enable our population to go back to their homes after a year. Whether this is going to work or not, I don't know.
Do you think it will require a ground invasion? Can you see ground troops being sent across the border from Israel into Lebanon?
It might, and it's been sort of part of the vocabulary in the past few days. I hope it doesn't get to that. A land maneuver is expensive. This is mountainous terrain. We were there in the 2006 Second Lebanon War. It was not a picnic, and Hezbollah has increased its strength since then. It fought in the Syrian civil war and became a trained army. So land operation could be very costly. It could, probably would be effective at the end, but would be costly in terms of casualties.
Itamar, Rabinovich, thank you very much for sharing your views with us, former Israeli ambassador to the US and former chief negotiator with Syria. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, for perspective of what's really happening on the ground there in Lebanon, especially the political perspective, I'm joined in the studio now by the independent member of the Lebanese parliament, Adib Abdel Masih. Sir, thank you very much for making time to speak to us. Let's start by talking about what the situation is like back home in Lebanon and for your constituents at the moment.
Well, as we speak, it's a big chaos. The south of Lebanon is fully destroyed, is almost fully destroyed. The attacks are all over Lebanon, especially the south, Bekaa, and few other cities. We have over 2,000 injured, 600 people died. Out of them, there are 52 children and 90 women. We have over 500,000 of intern domestic displacers in the other safe places. In my own area, we have almost now 10,000 people of southern people, southern Lebanese, who are seeking help. They are staying in public schools. They are staying in churches. Some of them were staying on the street for 1 or 2 days. So it's a complete chaos over there, and the situation is very bad. Is much worse than the war in 2006, and I think it's going to be. It's already a disaster on the Lebanese people. I hope the situation ceases as soon as possible.
There's a lot to get into there in terms of how authorities are coping, how people are coping in Lebanon. But first, before we go any further, I'm interested to know what you're doing here in Dubai, speaking to us in the studio. What you hear?
Actually, my job is in Dubai. I'm residing in Dubai for the past 26 years. And it was by chance that I came to check my work and my family who are staying here. And I was the last flight on Emirates. It happened by coincidence. So now I'm stuck here and I'm looking how to go back to Lebanon. I think in a few days I'll be back.
Indeed, a lot of the airlines are no longer flying in and out of Beirut, obviously for safety reasons. Let's talk about the crisis situation in the country for the people on the ground. You're talking about displacement, the need for aid, the need for meals, the need for healthcare. We're speaking about this elsewhere in the show tonight. Talk to me about what your role is as a politician in this time. What can you actually do?
I mean, as a parliament member, I do not have an executive role in the government. I do control, I do observe, I seek for accountability, and of course I can do domestic help for the people living in my own area, because I also had an association, a foundation for human aids. Other than this, my main point is how to push the government to seek an immediate ceasefire, and how the General Assembly of the Parliament can gather immediately and elect a president. Can you imagine we have a war in Lebanon and we do not have a head of a state to speak on our behalf? We only have a party who is involved in the war and who took our decision, our own decision, and our own freedom to fight for a cause that do not belong to us. That's why the main thing that a parliament member can do now is to go to the parliament and elect a president. And this is the most important thing, of course, after ceasing the fire.
And that's, asking for a lot, like you said, because there's current, aerial bombardment over Lebanon. And then there is a need for a decent political structure, which there hasn't been for quite a long time. Talk to me about why, in your perception, Lebanese politics has been in such disarray up until this point. What are the main drivers?
Madam, from 1988, the militias and the mafias control the country. We haven't seen even one day without a control of other country on our own state. We've been occupied by the Syrians from 1990 till 2005. After the 2005, we had the influence of the Iranian over Lebanon. We had, sorry to say, but we had almost dummy presidents who came and dummy governments who were toys in the hands of the other state like Syria and Iran. So so far we didn't have a real state, independent state, a sovereign state who can control all over Lebanon, who has its own control over the whole space of the whole area of Lebanon. We are an occupied country. We are occupied by the militia, behind it Iran. We are occupied by the mafia who stole the country, who stole the depositors, who stole the money of the retired militants, retired employees of the government. This is the current situation. So we are in a chaos from 40 years, and we will not be able to build a country unless we take the sovereignty of the whole Lebanon and we elect a sovereign president and an executive government who cares about the people, who can build up the economy, who can return the stolen money of the depositor, which are worth $90 billion. This is what we need at the moment. And so far, for the past 40 years, we never had this.
And in terms of the way you've dealt with that as a politician, you're now an independent because you withdrew from the newly formed Renewal Bloc. Even a reform-minded bloc can't seem to find organisation. So what hope is there?
Well, it's true that I'm an independent, but I am part of the opposition, which is 31 MPs who believe in the sovereignty of Lebanon, who believes in the true reforms that we should do to build up the country, who cares about the system, not about the people or who comes. For example, I'm not coming from a political house or political family or any political background. I never joined any party in my life. I was whole my life living in Dubai and working hard to feed my family. But the people ask for such people who were out of the system, who can come to the country, come back to their country and help to build up the system in the country. I know it's a difficult job, but we have to try, we have to keep fighting for the future of our children and grandchildren and our new generation.
What role do you think the Lebanese diaspora have to play in that? Because so many Lebanese have left over decades and live in other countries and other cities. Are you saying that more need to come back?
The diaspora has played a big role. 30% of the GDP of Lebanon, as we speak now, is from the money of the diaspora, who are sending to their own families. That's one. Two, over 270,000 people registered in the last parliamentary election in 2022, living all over the world. So they played a big role to bring people like us in the parliament. So we have seen and we have witnessed the major role and the important role and the unique role of the diaspora all over the world. And we are depending on them to also keep changing over the days, keep changing over the elections, and build up and inject a new generation in the parliament and in the political vein, so we can have a better prospect for Lebanon and the Lebanese people.
Let's think about our international viewers here on Al Arabiya News, because we've got people watching from all over the world, engaging with us online. And I think a lot of people, particularly in Western countries, if they haven't been to the Middle East and certainly not to Lebanon, they don't understand how an organization, a militia group like Hezbollah can have such a grip on a country, can be such a big part of the country, can live alongside people who are non-Hezbollah. Explain to our viewers, if you can, why the issue of Hezbollah in Lebanon has not been resolved.
Yeah, we had a civil war which started from 1975 and ended in 1990. In 1990, the Gulf War also started, and Syria made a deal with the Americans to control Lebanon over helping the American against the Iraq invasion in Kuwait. So after all this happened and after we finished the civil war and we made the Ta'if agreement between all the parties, a lot of major leaders were even either put in jail or they were exiled outside the country. The only people who were kept in the country were the pro-Syrians. So they controlled the country from 1990 till 2005. Till Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri was assassinated. We had the Cedars Revolution in 2005, and the Syrian troops were sent out of Lebanon after a long occupation. After that, instead of the people building up their country, Hezbollah, who was fighting all over this year against Israel at the south, at the southern border, and never got involved in the politics directly, he decided to go directly and get involved in the politics. And he had MPs and ministers, and he got more into the political life. And this is where we started having the direct control of the Iranian regime in Lebanon. So These guys, they didn't allow the country to be built up. They made the 7th of May trouble in Beirut. And then after that, they brought weak presidents over the years. And all over these years, the real people of Lebanon, the sovereign people of Lebanon, were kept outside and they couldn't control. And even whoever came back, either he got involved with Hezbollah, he made a deal with Hezbollah, and they controlled the country over corruption, or the good people stayed in the opposition, like where I am today. So unfortunately, over these years, the militia, because they have the weapons and they have the control, they were occupying all the corners of the country, and they didn't give a chance for the real democracy and for the real liberty to occupy and to control the administration and to be able to build a real country like we dream, like Dubai and UAE.
Adib, Abdel, Masih, we know you've got a lot to attend to at the moment, but we appreciate you coming to the studio. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the United States has played a significant and multifaceted role in the Israel-Lebanon conflict, a complex interplay of regional politics, military engagements and humanitarian concerns. The US has consistently supported Israel, viewing it as a key ally in the Middle East, while also seeking to address Lebanese sovereignty and stability, particularly in the face of Hezbollah's influence. Balancing these interests has proven challenging, but through various administrations, the US has aimed to facilitate dialogue and peace while grappling with the intricate realities on the ground. Speaking at the UN General Assembly yesterday, President Biden, in his final address to leaders, calling for calm.
Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by the former US Deputy National Security Advisor under President George W. Bush and former Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to counter the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant under President Trump, James Jeffrey. Sir, good of you to make time to speak to us and just talk to us very basically about how dangerous you think the current situation is in terms of prospects of wider escalation in the Middle East.
Well, thank you for having me on. Well, this obviously is a very dangerous situation, but I would put it in a different way. Iran's development of a whole set of proxies as part of its 20-year campaign to seize effective control of the Middle East, with Israel as one of its targets, is the underlying danger to the region. And this danger has become acute on the 7th of October. Everything we see since, including this campaign in Hezbollah, has to be placed in that context. Israel believes itself, I think correctly, and I mean the state of Israel and the people of Israel, not just Netanyahu, that they are in an existential fight and that they have to deter Hezbollah, Hamas, and other Iranian proxies from continuing these attacks. And in the end, they'll do whatever it takes to stop it if the United States or other countries cannot persuade Hezbollah or Iran to cease.
Yeah, I find it interesting the last few days during this breaking news cycle. I've spoken to a couple of your colleagues from various, especially Republican administrations stateside, who have re-emphasized again and again that we should be focusing the story on Iran and the way that they have maybe this has been a very, very long-term strategy. We know that through their proxies, but that the focus should be there. So let's think about what we've heard from them in the last sort of 48 hours. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei saying Hezbollah has been victorious and saying Lebanon's Hezbollah, which is standing up firmly for Gaza and putting itself in the middle of these bitter events, quote, is taking part in the jihad on the path of God. That will probably come as strong words of support for Hezbollah in these times, you would think.
Yes, although it's also interesting, it's emphasizing that Iran's strategy is not to get involved itself, but to do this through proxies, and that's been my experience in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere over the last 20 years. Secondly, that could be read as, okay, Hezbollah, you've made your point. Iran has an interest in Hezbollah preserving its long-range rocket and missile capabilities against Israel as a deterrent to Israel strikes on Iran. And therefore, these are at risk. So Iran has a complicated position as well. But I wouldn't say that it's just a Republican position on Iran. I know many people across the spectrum, particularly in Congress, who feel that way. This administration, and to some degree the Obama administration, looks at Iran differently, for example, than Joe Biden correctly looks at Russia in Ukraine. And that's having a certain impact on our ability to put together policies here.
So you're suggesting that under the Biden administration, there has been perhaps a release of some of that maximum pressure campaign we saw in previous administrations?
It has released that. That's a fact. The theory behind it is that you can do deals with Iran and that diplomacy and compromise and concessions to the Houthis, which we did in 2021, to Iran, to others in Iraq, can lead to some kind of calmer Middle East. But that hasn't proven to be the case. That's the problem. It's a failure of execution.
In terms of, let's think about execution, excuse the word there that I'm jumping on, but I was thinking about the way that Israel has responded to try and contain what it sees, of course, as the threat from Hezbollah, from the Iranian proxy across the border for it, assassinating various commanders over the last few days. Most recently, they're saying the head of Hezbollah's rocket and missile division. They claim that, of course, as a success, Israel, to prevent more missiles coming over the border. Iran's Khamenei is saying that killing valuable Hezbollah members will not beat Hezbollah. It will weaken them, obviously, but will not beat it. Do you agree?
Absolutely. That was our experience, for example, with the Islamic State. It was the experience with al-Qaeda. It was an experience with Zarqawi, the al-Qaeda leader in Iraq. At the time we killed him in 2006, al-Qaeda was seeing its greatest period of violence and activity. It's not unimportant to take these people out as part of a larger campaign to neutralize them. With the Islamic State, we effectively did that. And while they still exist in Syria and Iraq and also other places, attacks in Russia, attacks in Iran, they no longer control a state as they did in 2014 with up to a third of the territory of Iraq and Syria. So you can use that tactic as part of a larger military goal, which sadly usually involves combat on the ground, to make a fundamental change. But in and of itself, it doesn't deter, it doesn't change the dynamic.
Because there was discussion over the last few months with the situation happening in Gaza and Israel's strategy to try and take Hamas out root and branch, or at least anybody responsible for October 7th, that all it would do would be to create a new generation of extremist fighters. Are you saying then that the strategy of trying to go in and take out the threat, the enemy, as they see Israel do, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah, root and branch, it can work? Do you think they could achieve that goal?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I've been involved in a dozen of these things beginning 50 years ago in Vietnam. When you're dealing with a population that's sitting on the fence, it's true that too violent a campaign against insurgents will simply create more insurgents. But in a place like Gaza or in a place like Lebanon, which are basically under the control of excuse me, these terrorist organizations, they don't need inspiration to recruit people. They'll just recruit whoever they want. But essentially, what you can do, and the Israelis have largely done this in Gaza, we did it largely in Syria and Iraq, is reduce the ability of a terrorist sub-state actor to have a major offensive military capability. Hamas clearly does not have that anymore. How long that lasts and what the long-term situation in Gaza is, that's another question. But for the moment, there's a military success there. Israel hasn't achieved that military success, obviously, with Hezbollah, and it's trying either through military means or through the U.S. diplomatically to get something like a similar success.
And In terms of the byproduct of that type of strategy, as you yourself mentioned, unfortunately, of course, it often engenders ground conflict. We haven't yet seen sort of foot soldier invasion into Lebanon. We did, of course, see it over the previous months in Gaza. There is a huge civilian casualty toll in that type of thing. The US has done such strategies, varying degrees of success over the years. As you were saying, you've seen so many decades of it. In terms of the way that you see Israel carrying out this strategy to try and get sort of root and branch Iran proxies weeded out, how would you advise them to do that by limiting civilian casualties? Because so far, many would say they haven't.
They haven't in Gaza because the people are contained in an area twice the size of Washington, D.C., and they're not allowed to leave into Egypt. That wasn't the case, for example, when we went into Fallujah in 2005 in Iraq. We announced in advance we were going in and told all civilians to leave and encouraged them to leave and helped them leave. That is what will happen in Lebanon. We're already seeing this. Lebanese civilians by the thousands are fleeing the combat areas, mainly to the north. So it's not quite the same as in Gaza, but nonetheless, a ground offensive is a very serious step, particularly against a sovereign state, in this case, Lebanon. Legally, Israel is right in it is legally in a position where it can respond to attacks across its border, just like we did in Afghanistan after 9/11. But the diplomatic and military complications for Israel in the region are, of course, enormous.
They are enormous. Look, you've talked about diplomacy, and there has been analysis, plenty of it, based on the words that we've been hearing out of Israel, that diplomatic channels seem to be over there. Sort of, they waited, it hasn't worked. They've had to use some military, as they say, sort of action to get their goals achieved. Does that mean diplomatic channels are closed at the moment?
Diplomatic channels are never closed, and diplomacy complements military operations, and military operations complement diplomacy. It's simply the way these things work. It's like, protein and carbohydrates and fats. They're all part of a larger, international intercourse, international advancement of interests. Diplomacy's problem is that Hezbollah has linked its attacks on Israel, which are a violation of the laws of war, to the situation in Gaza. Essentially, unless Israel withdraws from Gaza, and that would mean at this point surrendering what's left of Gaza and the hostages to Hamas, then Hezbollah will continue fighting. That is what diplomacy has not been able to break. Diplomacy has not been able to find an end to the fighting in Gaza, and the Israelis do not want to surrender under pressure of under the pressure of Hezbollah rockets, because tomorrow Hezbollah will find another reason to fire rockets at Israel. I mean, we have to realize this is not just a one-off thing that then can go back to the normalcy in the Middle East. There has been no normalcy in the Middle East with Iran over the past 20 years. Through its strategy with these proxies. I've seen wars in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Yemen, fueled or generated by Iran and its proxies, and it's not going to stop.
Could another presidency, whether it be Harris or Trump, actually be effective in reining Iran in?
Donald Trump was, of the four, since Bush 43, Donald Trump was the most effective in that we actually had a strategy of prioritizing contesting Iran in Syria. That was my job, in Iraq and in Yemen. It had some success. It also had some failures. We didn't respond to the strike on the Saudi Aramco facility, but we did take out Qasem Soleimani, and we had some success in Iraq. It's not an easy strategy. I have to underline this. It's not a magic solution. It just is something you have to do, something the region expects you to do, and we owe it to ourselves, considering our great investment in this region over the past 25 years. How did we get to this point where we have these, forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Hashabi in Iraq, and Iran above all else, with both an Iranian nuclear threat and a conventional threat running amok through the region? And the answer is failures on our part, beginning with not understanding the problem, and secondly, always trying to de-escalate and get ceasefires. I was involved in the one with Lebanon and Israel in 2006. We stopped the Israelis from achieving anything like a military victory because we felt that de-escalation, ceasefires, and calm is what the Middle East needs. Well, what we did was turn Lebanon over to Hezbollah.
Is that, just wrapping, is that a fear, do you think, from US administrations now to go back at all into the Middle East and take a responsible role, given, you know, the pressure they've faced regarding failures in the past? Is it just too domestically unpopular?
What's domestically unpopular is committing hundreds of thousands of American ground troops to regime change, nation-building activities in places like Afghanistan or Iraq or with fewer troops in Libya. We have and are going to continue to have considerable military and diplomatic assets in the region. The question is how we use them. The question is what has been our policy towards Lebanon? What has been our policy towards Iraq? What has been our policy towards the civil war in Yemen? And to what degree are we pushing back on these forces? Now, it's not just military, it's also diplomatic. It's making the governments of Lebanon and Iraq have choices. It's also making the Israeli government have a choice. Israel needs to do more on the Palestinian front. It's occupying territory that it seized after it was attacked. That's militarily and that's legal under international law, but it has to have an end state. There has to be a way that the people who have been occupied can convince their occupiers that it's time to leave, that they're no longer a threat. That process that started with the Oslo Accords has been derailed over the past 20 years for various reasons. America is pushing, as are the Arab states, to get that back on track. That's an important diplomatic objective, and that's something that we should continue with the Israeli government and with our other partners. So there is a role for diplomacy as well. But essentially, you have to see what are the set of problems in the region, what is the number one problem, and how do you make it difficult for these proxies to get away with in the case of Hamas and Hezbollah attacking other countries.
Former US Deputy National Security Advisor James Jeffrey, we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.